All right, good evening. We're actually going to get started more or less on time, which is shocking. I'm very pleased to host another event in a series of lectures and conversations hosted by the Master in Design Engineering program, which, as you know, is a collaborative endeavor between the Ph.D. and the Paulson School of Engineering and Applied Science. We are thrilled to have Harry West here tonight, and I will introduce him in a moment. Let me just take a minute initially to trace very briefly the history of a company that has had a decisive influence in shaping many of the early interactions we've had with various forms of technology, from music tapes to personal computers. The history of Frog is somewhat representative of the profound changes that the field of product design has undergone, from giving shape to functions and needs to system-based consultancy and strategy. The formation of Frog actually dates back indirectly to 1969. Most of you were not around then, I think, when Hartmut Esslinger founded Esslinger Design in the Black Forest area in Germany. The company was a product design company in the traditional sense, giving shape to products, and excelled really in the consumer electronics area. The Sony Walkman was one of the early signature products. After meetings with Steve Jobs, the company eventually relocated to California, renamed itself Frog Design in 1984. Now also working for Apple, obviously, the early designs for the Macintosh computers were produced by Frog Design. These early Macintosh computers are now part of the permanent collection of the Whitney Museum of Art. It was finally in 2005 that the current company of Frog was formed, and Harry West has been its CEO since 2015. Frog today focuses on global design and innovation with an emphasis on user experience in industries such as financial services, telecommunications, healthcare, enterprise software, mobility, financial services, I actually said already, government services, and consumer products. Harry leads a talented group of designers, strategists, researchers, technologists, and program managers who strive to improve the daily experiences of people around the world. Harry has degrees in engineering from Cambridge University, in technology and policy from MIT, and a Ph.D. in robotics from MIT as well. He has led design and innovation at MIT, Continuum, and Profit before joining Frog. He's no stranger to the Ph.D. He's been active on the external advisory board of the NDE program. He lives locally and each week works from a different Frog studio in San Francisco, Austin, New York, Boston, London, Milano, Munich, and Shanghai. I hear he's flying out tomorrow, so we're happy to have you here today. And without much further ado, please welcome Harry West. Thank you.
Thanks. Thank you, Martin. I'm very honored to be here. Look forward to talking with you for the next 3/4 of an hour or so about design, AI, and customer experience. Servant or Svengali? That is the question. I do not know the answer, but I will share some thoughts around that. Please feel free to interrupt. I'm told that you won't, but I'm going to ask anyway. So we are living in the age of experiences, magical experiences. And I think that this image captures that sense of awe in her face, that little girl's face, because she is about to meet a princess or somebody who knows a princess. And this is the moment that she's been dreaming of for years. And that princess knows her name. And she is going to greet her by name on her birthday. And that is a memory that's going to live with her for the rest of her life. And that is all facilitated by some interesting technology right there on her wrist that you didn't notice until I pointed it out, that enables Disney to know who she is and to track her throughout Disney World and her parents, and for Disney to let her in without hindrance into this magical world, and for the princess, or the person who knows the princess, to greet her by name. And that's magic. And for that magic, her parents have saved up for many years, probably, to give their daughter this extraordinary experience. And the experience is going to be so wonderful for her that they're going to try to save up again to bring her back next year. And even if they don't do that, their daughter will remember this for the rest of her life. And when she has children, she will want to bring them back to Disney World as well, to share that experience that she remembers so fondly from her childhood. This is the age of experience. Now, not all of us every day experience something quite as magical as that, or we're not aware of it as we're experiencing it. But in fact, every day, in fact, I can see some of you in the audience right now using technology in a very magical way. And we're so oblivious to that. We're so used to that. And every day, we're enjoying the products and services of the companies that we buy from, and those experiences are extraordinary. How did this happen? Technology and design. I think that probably the most important technology that most of us don't pay any attention to anymore is the internet. And when that became public in around 1993 with the launch of Mosaic, that unleashed the possibility for the experiences that we're enjoying today. And that was followed shortly thereafter by the mobile phone and mobile communication. It has changed a lot since then, but this came out around 1999 and was the first mobile communication technology, or smartphone. And then followed quickly around 2002 by the first social network, Friendster, still big in Malaysia, I believe. And that unleashed a revolution, because with the power of the internet and mobile phones and social networks, our opinions as individual consumers mattered more than ever. And with a tweet, we could bring down a brand. Or with a tweet, we could even bring down a candidate, as is happening today. And so what happened was that instead of the consumer rotating around the enterprise, we went through a Copernican revolution, and the enterprise began to rotate around the consumer, because each individual consumer has a power of communicating through social networks with every other consumer, and that opinion matters. And it's that collective voice of all of us that determines the fate of companies large and small. And so that today, every company is determined to deliver the very best possible customer experience. Their future, their very existence depends on it. And this is the revolution that has happened over the last 20 years or so during our lifetime. And so today we experience these extraordinarily high-quality products and services. And I'll just go through some sort of obvious examples of extraordinary high quality, like the BMW automobile, or your iPhone, or for some of us, for some people, their automobile insurance company. Extraordinarily high quality and a highly rated customer experience. On Netflix, how we choose our movies. Almost every product and service that we interact with today, the experience has been very painstakingly designed for our delight. We're all like that little girl greeting the princess. Those companies know us by name often, and they've designed the experience around us. And we love it, and we pay for it. And if we're ever disappointed, we let everybody know. And then a new technology came along. And I think that the first paper around deep learning and backpropagation came around 2006. And that is just beginning to unleash a new revolution. And we don't really know where that is going. And so what I want to do today is explore with you where the revolution of AI and design is going to take us, and think about what good can come of it and what traps there may lie in our future. So that's the question that we want to address. And before I do that, I'm just going to share a little bit about Frog, because I would like to show you some pictures about some of the work we've done, because I'm so proud of the company that I work for. So Frog, rumor has it that Frog stands for Federal Republic of Germany, because Hartmut came from Germany. I don't know if that's really true, and Hartmut has some other stories, which I will not relay today. But Frog is in the business of advancing the human experience. We design customer experiences, and we're constantly looking for ways to advance those experiences, to make them even better for people. We started, as Martin described, back in the early 80s, when Steve Jobs was looking for the best designer in the world, and found Hartmut Esslinger and said, "Hartmut, I need you to design my computers." And Hartmut said, "Steve, I will do that, but I will not work for you." Which is why he moved his company to California and set up right next door to Apple and designed most of Apple's computers in the early years, including the first Macs, the Apple II that is shown here. And what you see here is a revolution, because it is leading a company through a transformation enabled by new technology and changing customer expectations. It's a revolution because she is smiling. She is filled with happiness as she uses her computer. Until this time, computers were primarily work-related. They were industrial products or military products. And Steve Jobs and others had the vision to transform an industry from being a business to a consumer product industry. And as a result, it's now perhaps the most valuable company in the world. Technology is really not that easily distinguishable from magic, and magic makes us smile, whether it's the computer or the experience that this little boy, because boys like to go to Disney World too, being greeted by Mickey Mouse. And the challenge today is, how do we deliver a better experience for customers? And the economic advantage is in being able to deliver that experience in a way that is cost effective. So this is some recent work that we've just launched, or helped IKEA launch, which is their new line of smart lighting. Smart lighting has existed for several years now, but the challenge was how to make it so simple and seamless that anybody could use it, and so low cost that, as IKEA talks about it, it is designed for the many people, so that anybody can use it in a Western society. It's low cost, it is very simple, it is very secure, it is lighting for anybody. And of course, the measure of how well you're doing today is the Net Promoter Score. And I trust that everybody here is familiar with Net Promoter Score. That is the ultimate measure for how good your customer experience is. And executives, senior executives today, are living in fear of this score, because their compensation or their future in the company will depend on how well they're doing on their Net Promoter Score. It's a measure of, are your customers willing to promote or say they will promote your product, your brand, your company to other people? If that is high, your company will grow. If it is low, you'll probably go out of business. So the Net Promoter Score is super important. And this is a service that we designed with Saudi Telecom in Saudi Arabia. It's called Jawi. It's a new telecom service. And apparently, according to the CEO, it's now got the highest net promoter score of any telecom provider in the world. So we're super proud of that. And what Jawi is an example of is how design mediates technology. Because what's on that screen, shown in the top right, is only possible because of the technology, about 10 or 11 technology providers that are enabling that to appear on the screen. And what design is doing, as shown in that orange layer beneath the products, is we're mediating, we're coordinating, we're channeling all of that technology so that that woman looking at her phone gets a single unified experience of all of those technologies, and that's what makes it work for her. So that's Frog, and we're about 400 people globally. We're in these studios across the world, North America, Europe, India, China. And now let's talk a little bit about the power of design. Helmut Esslinger talked about form follows emotion. That was a response to form follows function. And Helmut recognized that it was emotion that was the goal of design. Our job is to seduce. That's what we do. We are licensed to seduce. We design, we create products and services that you want. And there's, I'm sure, people here who are lusting after the latest iPhone, which we had nothing to do with, but which follows in the heritage that Frog and Helmut helped to create some 40 years ago. So design can seduce. And that's why we get paid to do our jobs. That is my job. Our job is to create good design that improves a customer's experience, that shapes their behavior, so that the business that paid us grows. It's mercantile. It's commercial. But that's the business that we're in. That is the business of design. And design's reach has spread very far. If we go back 40 years, we were designing things like this, objects. And that was the primary role of design. Today, design has moved to the far top right-hand corner of my graph, and we're designing systems of things or experiences. We've gone from designing discrete products to systems of brand, product, and services. And then also building the capabilities within the enterprise to continue their design and development. That's the role of design today. And one way to think about that is to think that ultimately we're designing customer experience. And back when Helmut was designing the original Mac, he was designing the customer experience of a discrete product. Today, we're designing the customer experience of an entire company. And by customer experience, we mean all of the interactions and impressions that people have with an organization over time, shaping their opinions and, in turn, the economic value of the brand. And those interactions can be through many different touch points, through web, through mobile, through in-store, through call centers, through physical products, through buildings, through spaces, all of the interactions with the brand. And those impressions can be deliberately designed by the product, but more often today, let's think back to that social network, the mobile phone. More often today, those impressions come from friends and families and anecdotes from colleagues, from earned and unearned media and PR. That's where we hear about the products and services today, from our Facebook wall, from our feed. That's what tells us what our friends are talking about. And often we care about the feedback we're getting beyond the moment of purchase, but throughout the ownership and consumption of that product. That's the customer experience, and that's what we have to design so that people love using it, so that people recommend it, so that you go back and buy it again, and so that your friends buy it too. That's what we do. Now, AI adds a new dimension to customer experience. And that's what we want to talk about. AI enables multi-dimensional design. Let me explain. So here's a design for a digital experience for AIA, which is a large insurance company, particularly in Asia, and we have helped to lead them through a digital transformation. And when you look at that screen, we have X and Y. And that changes over time. But today, there is a new axis in design, and that's you. And by you, I mean you. So what's happening is that screen knows who you are, and they know a lot about you. They know your demographics. They know how you're interacting with the screen in the moment. They know, based on history, how people like you are going to behave in the future. And they can use that knowledge to make your experience better and to guide you in certain directions. So we look at AI as a tool that designers use to make the experience of customers even more convenient, even more seamless, even more emotionally connecting. It's great. Why would you not want to do that? And here's some sort of 3 simple ways that we can use AI in our design. We can use AI to develop new ways to interact. We can interact easily today through speech or text, for example. And AI can help us to understand, or help the machine to understand, what that speech or text means. We can simplify the experience by anticipating what is going to be easier for you. So we can make judgments on the fly. I say we, I mean the machine, can make judgments on the fly as to what is going to be easier for you to navigate and offer those up for you. We can make things more relevant. And again, I say we, I mean the machine, can make things more relevant to you by optimizing the offers, by enticing you with things, by offers that you are more likely to buy. And all of this will happen seamlessly, and generally you're not aware that it's happening. And it's been enabled by that clever algorithm that was first written about in 2006. Because suddenly, once we introduced deep learning, then the ability to recognize speech, for example, went from a high error rate to a very much lower error rate. So suddenly speech recognition became practical. It was a breakthrough. It was unanticipated. It was a surprise that it worked so well. And it continues to surprise us that it works so well. But it does. And so this leads to all sorts of possibilities. And I'm not going to show you any current client work because that would violate some confidentiality. So I'm going to show you some examples that different frogs in our different studios around the world have created to demonstrate what they're working on in a more abstract way. So we can create systems for conversational healthcare. We can streamline access to complex services and support with flows as simple as just using a WhatsApp chat. And so this can be our healthcare experience in the future, or at least how we access our health insurance, perhaps, or our car insurance. And so you're having a conversation with the device, and the device understands you because it understands text, and it anticipates your needs, and then it offers you things that it thinks will be more attractive to you. And it's fun and simple to use. And there you go. You just bought yourself some insurance. Here's an example that we have worked on with a financial service company. The financial service company discovered that people were leaving their website before they completed a transaction. And that was a problem for them. It was partly a problem because they weren't completing the transaction, but it was mainly a problem because of their next action, which was to pick up the phone and call customer service. And customer service is very expensive. So they asked us to look at ways that we could improve that, make it easier for the consumer, for the customer, and also reduce their costs by having less load on their customer service lines. So this is a very simple model. There's questions around allocation. If you have investments, you may want to think about how you're going to allocate money. There's questions around transfers, how you're going to transfer money from one fund to another, and questions around rebalancing, how you're going to rebalance your fund. And for those of you with 401ks or investments, you are probably familiar with these challenges. And what we discovered was that customers were getting partway through one of these operations, and then they were giving up. It was too difficult for them, or they weren't quite sure what to do, and they were phoning customer service. And we looked into it, and we discovered, using a deep learning network, that we could characterize the behavior of different customers. And then we could, on the fly, modify the web experience, the online experience, to make it easier for them. So, for example, given certain demographic information, certain behavior on the website, we could offer up something that looked more like a spreadsheet. And that would be easier for some people to navigate, because some people are more comfortable with a spreadsheet with all the information laid out in front of them, and then they can make the right choice. For other people, the spreadsheet was confusing, and what they needed was more help. They needed more of kind of a sequence of questions and answers that would eventually lead them to a decision. For some people, that was more convenient. For others, it drove them crazy, and they didn't want that. Can you guess, was it young people or old people who needed more help? Older people needed more help? Young people needed more help? Okay, so we have a divided audience here. We weren't sure. Nor our client wasn't sure either. It turns out, in this particular case, that older people were more comfortable with the spreadsheet, and younger people needed more help. Okay? It wasn't what we had guessed at the beginning. And it's not that younger people didn't know how to use a computer. They were very comfortable using that. But younger people often had less experience with investment decisions. And so it was more nervous-making for them. So they needed more help to get through that decision. Older people, and it wasn't just a question of demographics, it was also a question of how they behaved on the site. Or people with more experience were more comfortable taking shortcuts. And so we can adjust the site on the fly, and it's a better experience for everybody. People can complete their whatever it is they wanted to do, and fewer people we're going to be calling customer service. It's win-win all around, right? What's the thing that makes you nervous about that experience, or the thing that makes me nervous about it? Layoffs at the call centers, okay, that's one issue. But the other profound point is that people are having different experiences using the same website, and they're unaware that they're having a different experience. They're being categorized by a machine, and their experience is now being customized for them without them being aware of that. And that's not what we're used to, right? Normally, we're aware when we use a product. When I pick up my watch, it is my watch, and you can see it is my watch. It's not a different experience for you than it is for me. But using this website, It's a different experience. Now, we can also use more basic intelligent techniques and just provide algorithmic advice. And this is a site that we created for Schwab, which again provides advice to people making investment decisions. But the choices depend on the information that the consumer is himself or herself putting into the site. And so it's more understandable to the consumer that, yes, I may be getting a different experience because I'm telling the site explicitly what it is I'm looking for. That's a different approach, a little bit more transparent, not quite as clever. So these are different types of intelligence that we can employ in designing customer experiences. On the left are your very basic systems, where the user asks questions, the system checks, the system fetches an answer, and you get your response. On the right, we have more intelligent systems where the computer is using the history, the data set of previous interactions and drawing conclusions about the right answer without any interaction with a human being. So we're getting, theoretically, better responses, but there's nobody in the company that knows why the response is better. It's only the computer that knows. Yeah?
When designing, do you worry about filter bubbles and exacerbating
Yes.
profiles?
Yes. Hold that thought. Absolutely. So the point that was made is that, we'll address it now. The point that was made is that the learning algorithm is using data that may be biased in the first place. And those biases are now going to be propagated for future users without anybody being necessarily conscious of how that bias got into the system. It is just that the system on into the future will perpetuate those biases. And so that happens because we're working with data sets which are not designed specifically for equitable decision making. And that's a new challenge for us because typically we're using data that just happens to exist. It was collected for another purpose, and there are often implicit biases in that data. And it's a lot of work to try to deduce what those biases might be. So increasingly, what we find ourselves doing is trying to create new data sets from scratch, which are very carefully designed to be fair and not have implicit biases in them. Or we're using carefully chosen data sets, which we know through various, because they were collected serendipitously, are not going to have implicit biases in them. Here's another example of a digital experience that I'm guessing most people here will have enjoyed at some point, which is Netflix. And everybody here has used Netflix? Okay, everybody here has used Netflix. But actually, you probably haven't all used the same Netflix, because when you use Netflix, most of what you are experiencing on the screen as you select your movie is different depending on who you are. So Netflix does some very clever design using your demographics to the extent that they know them, your history on their site, your behavior, and they use a deep learning algorithm to change the design of the screen that you first see to optimize the probability that you're going to watch a movie from them. And so your experience using Netflix is different to your experience using Netflix. And you may or may not be aware of that, because unless the two of you are sitting side by side using your separate Netflix accounts, you would not be aware of that. So why are these experiences better? Clearly it works. The deep learning algorithm that Netflix employs is probably worth hundreds of millions of dollars, maybe more than that, to them because it increases consumption of their movies. Why are these experiences better? Well, they're more natural, they're easier, they're more empathetic. The computer knows you, and it's trying to bring you a better experience. So what is there to be worried about with that? Say it again?
You are repetitive of yourself.
Yes, okay. You will not necessarily be exposed to new things because the system is constantly trying to impress you with your previous experience. I think there's also a temptation of an unwary customer. The temptation is not for the customer, the temptation is for the company, where we as designers can cross the line from simplicity to seduction. And now it's our job to seduce. As we talked earlier, our job is to design products and services that are so beautiful, so compelling, that you cannot help but buy them. But most of us are aware when we're looking at a physical product or a constant screen of what it is that we're opting in for, what it is that we're buying. But when that screen is being tailored specifically for us, perhaps we are being taken advantage of. Adaptation, when that screen changes for us, what's the difference between adaptation and duplicity? When we're talking to a human being, if their behavior towards me is different to their behavior towards you, then we question that. We call that duplicitous behavior or hypocritical behavior in some cases. And that is not seen as a good character. But in business, it's very successful. What's the difference between customization and manipulation? Right now, the machine is not good enough to effectively take advantage of us generally. But if we anticipate how quickly this is advancing, then shortly, intelligent systems will be able to take advantage of us. Maybe they are today. So there's a reason why animals often travel in herds, because there's protection in numbers. There's safety in numbers. And for us today, the equivalent of the herd is how we respond to a brand. Brand experiences are shared by people. That's how when we go onto our Twitter account or Facebook, we're sharing an experience of a brand because we are all collectively having similar experiences of that brand. And therefore, my experience is relevant to you because it indicates what your experience might be. Brands are shortcuts, but brands depend on consistency. We trust experiences because others do. It was safe, and therefore it still is safe. That's what a brand tells us. A brand is an implication of quality, or perhaps for some, a tribal flag. And a brand depends on a shared experience. But what is the future of a brand? Who do we trust when the customer experiences are customized to individuals and continuously evolve beyond even the direct control of the firm that has created them? As the system continues to learn, nobody will know what your experience is. That will be unique to you. Let me end with a metaphor, a kind of a quintessentially British metaphor, because that's where I was born. And let's talk about a butler. And let's call him Jeeves. This was the original logo for Ask Jeeves. A few years ago, each one of us was given our own personal butler. And to begin with, he really wasn't very good at his job. And we only kept him around because, well, he was kind of entertaining. you could show off to your friends how you used your butler. And actually, he was pretty good at remembering things. And he knew a lot of facts. That was impressive. And then he learned how to navigate, which was useful. And then a few years later, Jeeves began to advise you on who your friends should be, or even who you should date, which was getting a little personal, but by then you were used to Jeeves being around, so you accepted his advice. And just recently, Jeeves has been learning to drive, so that's great. It'll be very handy. I won't have to do anything. Jeeves will take care of me. And Jeeves has been advising me on a lot of things recently. You know, what I should buy, where I should go, who I should talk with, what I should say. Jeeves is very, very helpful. And I appreciate his help. But I'm just beginning to wonder if his advice is in my interest, or does he have some interest? Is his advice for my benefit or for his benefit? But I've become so dependent on him that I kind of have to go along with what he's suggesting I do. And I'm a little bit concerned that Jeeves is not actually my servant anymore. He is a Svengali, and he's beginning to control me. But without him, I couldn't get anything done. So I'm just going to have to go along with Jeeves. I'm stuck with him. So that's the dystopian future. I don't think that's going to happen. I think that we will figure this out, and that we will embrace the extraordinary benefits that a machine Jeeves will offer us without falling into any of the traps. But it would be useful for us to think about some of the things that would help us navigate in the right direction. I think we may be under-imagining the future. If we think about how quickly things have advanced in the last 10 years in the field of artificial intelligence, how quickly it is being incorporated into many different customer experiences, I think there's some urgency for us to pay attention. Undoubtedly, it will be the applications that will overshadow the technology. If we think about our smartphone and GPS systems, clearly Uber and Tinder have overshadowed in their usefulness over the basic GPS technology or communication technology that underlies that capability. And so we can imagine that, and I don't think many people had in mind those applications when those technologies first became available. I believe that we will be surprised by the applications that are created building on these technologies. And they will depend on data, because without data, AI can do nothing. AI is dependent on data. But to your point, the quality of that data is key. We need to make sure that data is designed to avoid implicit bias in it, or to avoid perpetuating biases on into the future. And who's going to share that data? There's value in that data, and there's risk to us. So the right to privacy will give us more confidence to share. And it's interesting how different countries, different regions have taken a very different approach to privacy. So in the US, it's kind of more laissez-faire. Whereas in Europe, they're being much more proactive about controlling who owns the data. And it's you as an individual, it's your data, so you own it and you have the right to control it. Now trust will be tested because we'll all experience unfortunate or frightening interactions with these machines, and we'll become nervous, we'll test our trust. But design is key. If we design them right, then we will enjoy the benefits of AI without the pitfalls. And in order to do that, as designers, we have to remind ourselves that our job is to advance the human experience, not to take advantage of it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think we have time for a few questions.
Sure.
Dr. West, thank you so much for your it's very provocative, inspiring talk. So I have two questions actually. One is, so I'm trained as an architect, which as are probably many others in this building. So I'm wondering how, I guess, designers from these traditional disciplines could kind of enter the discourse or the arena of this kind of realm. And I guess, how do we leverage these, because we do a lot of design research on our daily basis, how do we leverage that in response to these paradigmatic shifts?
Well, it's up to you, I think. Actually, the person who leads AI at Frog was originally trained as an architect. So you're well prepared, or you could become well prepared. I think that the tools are becoming much easier to use. And the value is going to be in the application of those tools. And you are as well positioned as anybody to apply those tools. So just become comfortable and familiar with them. Yeah.
Your conclusion. Thanks. Your conclusion to that kind of dystopian vision was that you don't believe it's going to happen. I wonder where your optimism comes from, and examples that you can point to that show that we're on the right path.
Okay, so you know, I have a lot of reason to not be optimistic, right? At least the next few years. So I think my optimism comes from we have experienced how things can go wrong, and I have confidence that we will try to make sure that doesn't happen again. Generally, the way problems are solved is there is a disaster, and then we figure out what caused it, and then we try to minimize the probability of that happening again, right? We will deal with that with fake news, and we will deal with that with other issues in AI. Yeah.
So thank you for the speech. I'm wondering, for one side of the story is the dystopia future, but for the other is that the barrier we're facing now is that the expenses to implement this is very expensive. And for like the profitable company like Google, they sell the ads. Actually, they use this preference algorithm a long time ago because there's a huge profit in it.
Yeah.
And then the insurance company comes in, and like the Netflix comes in. But still, there are a lot of companies that is not going to be profitable at all. But how would they use these technologies to build their experiences?
So people in our company are constantly showing me examples of open source technology that is free or very low cost, that can be used very effectively, and that is as good, if not better, than some of these technology available from some of these larger companies you mentioned. So I don't think that that will be a barrier, as big a barrier as you're imagining.
Okay, so quick question. You use customer experience, and I know wording is very important, especially for a lot of design companies, and they go between using customer, user, or guest experience.
Yeah.
So why did you choose customer?
To be as generic as possible, okay? To encompass both consumers in a kind of B2C sense, and also customers in a B2B sense, business to business, where the concept applies equally. But yes, sometimes when I make a presentation like this, I talk about consumers, customers, citizens, employees, etc., to indicate the breadth of people who can experience a product or service. Thank you. Yeah.
So I understand how a really terrible experience might be sort of corrected by lessening a brand's value.
Yeah.
But I wonder how we sort of, what if the principal problem is that, let's say I create a system that is extremely good at showing you what you're craving, right? It
Yeah.
always knows exactly what you're craving and always delivers, right? Then you never try anything new,
Yeah.
right? And so
That's the point made down here, right?
Yeah,
You get
so-
stuck in a rut.
Right, but that also lessens the incentive to take risk in developing products in addition to reinforcing behavior. So if we have these things that we know they deliver and we know exactly how much they deliver and we know exactly what we're going to get if we do that thing, the incentive to take a risk on something that might fail is lower.
Right.
So what if the principal problem is that we just get so good at reproducing experience, and as that experience gets reproduced, it becomes more and more predictable. And so the risk for doing something different just keeps going up.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
how do we break out of that cycle?
Think about food, right? This happened with engineered food. There was a time when people craved Twinkies. I still do crave Twinkies because they were perfectly designed to appeal to me. I loved the taste of Twinkies. But they went out of business because eventually people began to crave newness, and they pushed for newness. And so in the last few decades, that you have seen an incredible array of foods from different parts of the world is come in as restaurants, as prepared food, as food you can buy in the supermarket, because we crave variety. Now, the firms that engineered the food to kind of appeal to a very specific sense of taste, that we're trying to exploit that, are beginning to lose out right now, and those sales are declining. I think the same will happen for sort of more generic experiences, that desire for variety, for stimulation, will eventually cause us to break out of that rut. That may not be true for everybody. Yeah.
Sort of two questions. The first is with regards to like the lack of interpretability of like a lot of these like deep learning models.
Yeah.
Is Frog also designing like tools and utilities on the back end for clients that will allow them to sort of better understand some of the dynamics of the systems that are being engineered? Is that part of the solution to this?
Our expertise is not in building the tools, but in using the tools and bringing those tools to bear on interesting design and innovation challenges. There are people at Frog who are certainly capable of building the tools, but as a company, our focus is on using them. And what we're finding is that there's tremendous potential using the tools available today to bring a lot of value to companies and to individuals.
And I guess the second question, sort of on a side note, you're talking a lot about design's role in sort of being critical of these issues.
Yeah.
Is there ever a point at which Frog says no to an application? I'm thinking of how design companies said no to smoking at some point in terms of ads. Would you ever say no to a certain kind of data policy or data project?
We absolutely say no to smoking, to tobacco, guns, and gambling, because you don't have a choice. As a consumer, as a customer, you don't have a choice if you're addicted or if you're dead. So we say no to those. I do think it's interesting, getting back to your point, if these systems can become addictive, then we'd have to question our involvement. But right now, I don't think that's the case. I think they're serving people better. I think on balance, they're serving people so much better. They're simplifying the experience in such a compelling way that on balance, I think they're very, very positive. And so we're very happy to work with our clients on helping them to develop these smarter systems. But we can anticipate that at some point, that they could be used, and we'll need to be constantly aware, I think, and checking to see if that happens. Okay. Yeah.
I wanted to bring back your slide on design being mercantile.
Yeah.
It felt like, I might be projecting my own interests, but it felt like you took a very long pause and you left a lot unsaid there. And it also feels like that point taken to its logical conclusion is a lot of the driving forces behind more opaque, less aware, less user-controlled services. Do you want to take this opportunity to speak more on that?
Sure. I do think I do think that part of the challenge of design. This is prompting me to take my jacket off. So I think part of the challenge of design that is true for the sort of design business that we're in, and for architectural design as well, which is it is so intrinsically rewarding. Like most of us love our jobs. We love doing design. And there's at least two traps there. There's probably more. One is we love it so much that we're willing to do it for not very much money, right? That's a challenge for all of us. But the other trap is that we love doing it so much that sometimes we forget why somebody is paying us in the first place. And the reason somebody is paying us is not for our intrinsic reward, but for their financial reward. That's the reason we get paid generally. And it's a constant tension in a creative firm, because on the one hand, we depend on people's individual drive and creativity. Without them self-actualizing, we don't get to those sort of breakthroughs in design innovation that we're known for. And yet, that at some point needs to be tempered with, and is this really going to help the consumer or the customer? Is this really going to help the business? Is this really easier for somebody to use? And that's a big part of what managing a design firm is about connecting those two and balancing those two interests. Yeah.
I think I have the mic, and then I'll get it next. Sure. I heard you talk a lot about examples regarding consumer products. That's what Frog works in. But some of the problems that you surfaced around AI were problems about democracy and sort of these larger issues that we've been seeing in the last year. I come from a world of technology and design and government. I know you have a Ph.D. on technology and policy, and I wonder if you feel that designers have a role in addressing some of these larger structural issues, or working with some of these like broader institutions around the way that AI and design impact our everyday lives.
Yeah, absolutely. At Frog, we are very concerned with those broader implications, and we do practice in some of those areas, working with some government organizations. I do think that the challenge there is to find the mechanism, what it is that's going to give you leverage in those environments. Generally, particularly in the United States, we can't make something happen just because it is right. That's the reality of the world that we live in. We can generally make something happen if we can harness it to financial gain, then we can make it happen. Or we can make it happen if we can harness it to somebody being more likely to be elected. Then we maybe have to make it happen. But it's very difficult to gather the resources to make change just because something is right. And that again, is a constant tension in a creative firm, where you always want to do the right thing, but you're limited because you can only do the right thing if you can find somebody to help you do the right thing. Yeah.
This is a follow-on, and I think you answered it very, very well, but you talk about system or older term value chain, you have an end-to-end view, and maybe a lot of consumer product companies don't. So there's resource that goes into the product, and then the life cycle of the product, and then the disposal.
Yeah.
So I know that fast fashion and the quantity of fashion that's bought is maybe 4 times as much clothing than 10 or 20 years ago. So when we talk about serendipity or the idea to educate your client, I wonder, and then again, it's a moral, ethical question, and it may not be the designer's job, but how does a company like Frog look at that with a company that may hire you that may not have that insight to deal with that system effect?
Yeah, very, very good question. Thank you. And I think it's similar to the question that was just asked. And I think what you have pointed out, actually, it's the complement to your question. What you've pointed out is that there are many problems, some of which can be solved in the commercial space, but some can only be solved in the political space. And I think that issues around environmental impact, for example, equity, generally those are political issues, policy issues, and we just need to be mindful that the company that we're working for is working in a commercial environment, and they will fail if they try to independently affect political change in the design of their products and services, and their competition doesn't, unfortunately. And so we have to bear in mind the limitations of the commercial context in which they're operating. And we need to take our energy around the environment and channel that into political activism, donation support, political candidates for the right cause. Because they in turn will be able to change policy and regulation, which will mean that the company that we're working for will be encouraged to deliver the right products and services, not only for the consumer, but also for the world.
Just to add to that, some companies take that stand, like Patagonia.
Yeah.
So some independent of political, but that's, I guess, what a leader could be.
Right. There will always be a group of people who will pay more for a particular political statement or for a particular cause. And I think Patagonia is a fantastic example of a company that has built a brand around that. I always like to remind people at Frog that, and I think this is true, that everybody at Frog makes more money than the average family in America. And that we may have very strong principles, but the average family in America needs to feed and clothe themselves. And they're important too. And they can't afford to buy at Patagonia. Yeah.
Talking about policy, I have I guess, two-sided question. The general data protection regulation in Europe that I think is becoming in effect in the spring or something like that. Are you familiar? I'm curious, has it affected the business of your clients in any way, and therefore your business?
Oh, absolutely. GPR? Yeah. There will be a revolution in financial services, for example, as that data is no longer owned by the banks, but is owned by you as an individual, and so other people can use that data. And so that's very good for our business because it's resulting in new products and services, new competitors, new companies entering the space. So absolutely.
And
we like that, both morally and financially.
Great. On the other side, I'm wondering if you're perceiving any trends with regards to privacy, or I guess how people and their attitudes towards collection of information and how much they understand what's being collected.
Yeah.
Any changes?
We ran a study a few years ago. Tim Morey, who's head of the strategy group at Frog, and one of his colleagues, Allison, ran a study globally, quantitative study on attitudes towards privacy and data. And there are very significant differences in different countries, different regions. It's probably time to redo that study because I think you're right that people's attitudes are evolving rapidly. It was published in Harvard Business Review a few years ago.
Okay, and thank you for your talk. And you mentioned that trust is a big issue. So I'm wondering, has Frog any experience like designed to encourage trust?
Yes, yeah. I think that it's going to become increasingly important. And so designing into interactions the right degree of transparency, explaining to the customer or consumer why we're asking for that information or what is happening to that information engenders trust. And I think that's going to become increasingly important as we design these experiences.
Great, thank you so much. I mean, clearly, the conversation could continue. Thank you so much, Harry. Clearly, the conversation could continue much longer. One thing is clear, there will be profound changes throughout every aspect of life. What exactly there will be, we don't know. I think this was an important conversation to start here, and I think it has to continue because it will also affect what we do here in education and learning. There's lots of work in that area. So thank you so much for bringing this topic to us. It's difficult, I think. Lots of open questions, and we'll have to follow up and continue. So again, thank you so much, Harry.